Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Todd Caponi. Todd is the author of the 3-time Best Book Award-winning book called The Transparency Sale. He's a speaker and workshop leader as the founder and CEO of Sales Melon, and he's also the managing director of Chicago's VentureSCALE. He's a multi-time C-level sales leader and a behavioral science nerd, and also, as I found out, a sales historian nerd later on in the podcast. And he's guided 2 companies to successful exits. Todd was introduced to me by Jason Bay. Many of you know Jason Bay and his work over at Blissful Prospecting. Jason's one of our coaches here in our coaching program here at Startup Selling. And Jason had Todd on his podcast. And Jason's like, dude, you got to have Todd on your podcast because he is awesome. And so Todd was gracious enough to make some time for us here on the Startup Selling Show. So here are a couple of topics that we talked about in my conversation with Todd that just wrapped up. Number one, we talked about Tommy Boy, the movie, and you're going to get that as soon as we kick off the conversation, what I mean by that. And most importantly, we used that movie, Tommy Boy, as a way to set up an important definition, a distinction between authenticity and transparency. And Todd went into great detail describing and defining transparency as a way to be truthful with your prospects in the right way. Throughout the course of the conversation, we talked about this concept of the transparency sale, which is the title of this book. And a couple of examples or a couple of things to listen for is, number one, talking about the importance of disarming your prospects. Many of them have a suit of armor, if you will, all ready to go when it comes time for you to start selling. And there are certain techniques that you can follow using the transparency sale method that will help to disarm that prospect and help them be more truthful with you. And we went into detail about a specific sales situation that Todd found himself in New York City in a 90-degree room with what he thought was just a quick coffee turned out to be a full room of people and a quick presentation. So we talked deep about the importance of disarming your prospects with transparency. Secondly, we talked about how do we turn that transparency, not just externally and how we're being open and honest and truthful with our prospects, but how do we be open, honest, and truthful with ourselves when it comes to measuring our results? And Todd has what he calls the results formula. And the results formula just looks at 4 specific KPIs that if you are moving those 4 KPIs in the right direction, very small adjustments, very small changes, very small improvements in any of those 4 will lead to much larger changes and growth for your sales and for your company. We transitioned and talked about prospecting and the importance of adding value, and as well as talking about the importance of focusing and doing what he calls firmographic studies. And all of this relating back to the idea of being transparent, being open, being truthful with your prospects so that you can get to the end result that you want and they want. They want to solve the problem, you want to get a new customer, but that's only going to happen if there's a match. So that's the main crux of the conversation with Todd. I'll tell you, the time flew by. Really, really excited to have had Todd on the show. So make sure you listen to those topics and lots more. So before we head over to the conversation with Todd, I have to say thank you. I want to say a big thank you to Jocelyn Alvarez. So Jocelyn, many of you who listen to the show are clients. Many of you have attended workshops, trainings. Maybe you even just sent me an email or 2, and we've had a quick chat over the phone. If you've had any kind of interaction with me, chances are you've had some interaction with Jocelyn. Jocelyn's our executive assistant here at Sales Qualia. And not only is she just a phenomenal executive assistant, she's also effectively the producer of this show. Jocelyn's responsible for booking our guests. She's responsible for scheduling and rescheduling when we need to reschedule, either because of my schedule or our guest schedule. She's responsible for all of the production, post podcast interview. So everything that happens after the time that I complete the interview and do this recording, she takes it from there and makes sure that the show gets produced. The show gets loaded up onto Apple Podcasts and every other platform. She takes care of all of the notes, all of the announcements that happen, the posts that you see, the emails that go out, as well as making sure that before the podcast, I've got a complete list of information, biographies, any kind of research that's important for me to know going into the conversations I'm having with each and every guest. So basically, the only thing I do is show up, I start talking, and then I'm finished. She does everything else. And so not only is she doing all of the executive assistant work for us at Sales Quality, but she's also producing the show. And without her and the work that she does each and every week on the show would not happen. And so, Jocelyn, thank you for your work. I really appreciate what you do, helping us to deliver this content, give these ideas out, and share that with the entire sales community and the entire world. So thanks for your work. Really appreciate it. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Todd Caponi. One of the things I like to do and ask every guest is, like, when people say, "Hey, Todd, what do you do?" How do you describe that? You said you're just on the phone with a client, but what is it, the work that you're doing every day? And then we can get into the book, The Transparency Sale.
Yeah. So it's funny. I was, in my last role, I was the chief revenue officer of a company here in Chicago called Power Reviews, and like a multi-time, VP, C-level sales leader. But then like I got this crazy idea to write a book. And like, I'm not just being modest when I say this, like, trust me. When I wrote the book, I thought there was a pretty good shot that it would suck. All right. Like that, because like I'd never written a book before. And I turned over the manuscript. And so this is what happens when you write a book. You write the manuscript, you turn it in before the deadline, and then you just sit there going, all right, the editors have it. Let's hope they just look at it and go, wow, this is awesome. Like, there's a couple of typos, but we're good. Like, that's what you hope. It's not what happens. Even Hemingway said that the first draft of anything is SHIT, like it's crap.
Sure.
And that's what mine was like. So like, that's why when the book came out, I was like, you know what, it'll come out. I'll do some speaking and some teaching around it, and then I'll go find a job again. Well, the book has caught fire. It's selling better now than it did 18 months ago when it came out, which is crazy. And so today what I do is I speak and I teach really these, what I call it, kind of simple workshops that you learn in the morning, you actually use it in the afternoon, and you get results in the afternoon around positioning, presenting, negotiating, are kind of the three core elements that I focus on. And so that's, I'm founder and CEO of my own little business that is doing workshops and speaking on the concepts of the transparency sale.
Yeah, I love that. We have a somewhat similar origin story in that I was just doing some workshops that started, like, I started this whole company by accident because I wrote a book that was designed really just to be used by my sales reps at Altos Research, where I was the COO. And I was thinking, like, I hired these two sales reps. I got to teach them stuff. What am I going to teach them? So I just kept this Evernote file. And then one Thanksgiving, it was like cold and rainy. We were staying at this condo with my in-laws, and I just went to Starbucks every morning and just wrote for like 3 straight hours and got the first draft out, done in like 4 days, polished it over the next month, and self-published it by January. And book led to workshops led to more speaking, and then that led to clients, and then did that on the side for 4 years, and then decided, okay, I'm just going to do this now. And so really similar in that, just sort of like by accident, turned out to be the company that is today based on the book.
Yeah, I'll tell you, so 2019 was, can this work? Like, can I actually make this work? And it went so well that 2020 was like, all right, I'm making it work. How do I take it to scale? And then March just punched us all in the face. So like, I was actually starting to think about, like, I have a proposal written for book number 2, got 3 publishers interested in it that I was hoping to be writing by now. But yeah, obviously we've had to all take our businesses and go, all right, who we were in 2019 is not who we are in 2020. And, for me, and my advice to everybody, which is a little bit provocative, which is I was encouraging everybody to, if your messaging was developed pre-COVID, hit select all and then hit delete on it, and then sit in a room and go, who are we now in, mid 2020? And why should our customers care? Because they're all thinking about different things, and what messaging worked in an up market doesn't work in an uncertain market. We've got to embrace that and do it in a dramatic fashion.
And I love that approach because you get so anchored to like, oh, maybe we can sort of like use some of this part of the messaging, or we could sort of still work with that part of the market. And like you said, if we just go in and say, now is the time, if you're ever going to make a shift, if you've ever wanted to make a shift, if there's certain customers you don't actually really like serving, if there's certain products that you really don't like supporting, then now's your challenge. Now's your chance, because you're all is forgiven.
Exactly. Well, yeah. And then it's even the simple stuff. Like, my website was all about me speaking to audiences at conferences and doing in-person workshops. And gosh, if I didn't go to my website like March 15th and hit delete and rewrite that, I'd look like an idiot. So,
Yeah.
but like I say that dramatically, but there's still lots of organizations that still have the same messaging on their websites, that still have pictures of people hanging out together. And just like, hey, listen, one organization that I work with, we changed all the messaging on their website, which is not what I do, but it was just kind of like, hey, can we start there with what you're presenting to your customers is about what it's like being in an office. Nobody's in an office. So let's start there. What you do matter in kind of the current COVID, post-COVID era? And then second of all, you've got all these people it's like a cartoon that's got pictures of people in offices. I'm like, what are we going to do with that? Well, if you go to their website now, those people are all wearing masks. And it's like, see, that's just a little touches that show that you are current and that you understand what your potential buyers care about in this environment. And that's all I'm asking is like, gosh, it's a different era than it was before. Just spend a little bit of time and figure out, why should customers care now more than ever?
Well, let's talk about that. And I want to begin with the book is The Transparency Sale. And you said like you had this idea for the book. So was there a trigger point where you said like, oh, I got to do this? Come hell or high water, doesn't matter if the book sucks.
Absolutely. Like, by the way, side story, I resigned from my job to go write it. And then like the first conversation I had was with a mentor of mine that was just like, Todd, for the next 3 months, you need to say no to everything and focus on the book, right? You're going to get people that are calling you and offering you stuff and like, hey, Todd's on the market, let's go get him. Literally like the next day, a COO from Salesforce calls me and is just like, hey, you need to be the CRO at my brother's company. And I was just like, hey, I'm writing a book and this is what I'm doing. And the answer is no. And he's like, Todd, imagine the new experiences that you'd have and how much better your book would be. And I was like, it's not a memoir. It's a book that needs to be written right now. And like, here's the trigger on it. As the CRO of Power Reviews, and as you might guess, we're in the market of helping retailers and brands collect and display ratings and reviews. So you're on crocs.com and you're looking at a pair of shoes. You scroll down the reviews down there. We were the engine behind the collect and display of that. All right. So
got it.
1,000 customers. That's what we did. We did a study with Northwestern University in Chicago, which is, I live just outside of Chicago. It was looking at how consumers buy, how they decide when a website is acting as the salesperson, right? So you're on Crocs, you're looking at the shoes. What do you do? Well, the first element is no surprise. Turns out we all read reviews now, right? Like it said 96% of us read reviews. We're looking to buy something we hadn't bought before that's of medium to high consideration, meaning it's not a pack of gum. It's like you're buying something of substance. I haven't found the 4% that don't. So we all look at reviews. But the thing that literally changed my life, like I quit my job and wrote a book, 82% of us go right to the negative reviews first. Exactly, like you're one of those. And when a review score, an average review score on a product is between a 4.2 and a 4.5, those products sell at a higher conversion than any other score, including a 5. So a 4.2, a product that's score is a 4.2 will sell better than a 5. Imperfection sells better than perfection when a website is acting as the salesperson. So I'm like, all right, that makes sense. A buyer is driven to try to predict what their experience is going to be like. And we're kind of wired to know that perfection doesn't exist. And unless we can get at that, what the downside is, we won't buy. But how does that impact human to human or B2B selling? So like 3 days later, I tried it. I was in front of a client. It was a weird combination of things, but I literally started with what our competitor not only does better, but it was a function that they had just released that we didn't have and wasn't on our roadmap. And when the customer asked, like, how are you better? I instead said, well, can I start with how they're better? And magic happened. Like, it was crazy. The guy kicked everybody out of his office within 15 minutes and showed me his actual budget. And I was like, all right, there's something to this idea that, a B2C sales, when a website's acting the salesperson, or in human-to-human selling, when we lead with our negatives and expose our flaws up front, again, 82% of us go to the negative, it's because our brain wants that. Give it to the customer, help them predict their experience, disarm their kind of resistance to influence. When we do that, sales cycles speed up, win rates go up. We qualify deals in better that we should be working on, and we qualify deals out faster that we're going to lose anyway. And when all of that happened, I tried it a couple more times, and I was just like, dude, this is crazy. I got to get these ideas out because A, transparency sells better than perfection. But B, the idea that there's this massive proliferation of reviews and feedback on everything we do and buy and experience, we got to do it anyway. So now is the time. And that's what drove it. That was kind of the triggers.
I love that story. Is that the same story that you wrote about in chapter 6? It's on page 76.
Yeah, is it so that apparel
the guy's
company,
named Derek?
Yes, yeah. Exactly. It was the apparel company where I walked in, and it was crazy. I thought I was having coffee with this guy.
Yeah,
that's the way it was set up.
So, and I think this is important, like to set the stage here, because like if I'm listening to this podcast, it's like, okay, Todd's giving us all the sales advice. Like this situation is a situation that happens to all of us.
Yeah,
all the time. You think you're going into a meeting with one person, whether it's a Zoom call or in your case, that situation, oh, we're going to grab coffee or we're going to do a quick demo. And I've had this. I had this with PIMCO once. I thought it was a demo with 3 guys, and all of a sudden, like 20 analysts showed up. And they're like, bing, 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 showing up on my GoToMeeting. I was like, what the, this is crazy. So that's the situation here. And in the book you wrote, like this guy Derek said, cut through the crap. Can you start explaining the differences between you and them and what we can expect to be better about your company?
Yeah, exactly.
That is a question that every person has probably gotten some version of.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, the backstory on that was I was in New York. I had an afternoon cancel. I was the CRO at a VP of sales in Chicago here that texted me and was just like, hey, we got this lead, freaking great apparel company. And so I called them and I was like, tell me about what they're planning to do. And they said, well, they're going to issue an RFP and then they're going to have us come to New York and present to the team. And I was like, oh yeah, New York. I'm in New York. My afternoon just opened up. Can you have the rep just reach out to their head of e-commerce and see if he wants to grab coffee? Like I've got a couple of hours. And again, I thought there was like a 1 in 50 shot that the guy would say yes, but he did. I go to the offices, go in, and to your point, I walk in. He pulls me into his office, which is a tiny Manhattan office, and it was like 90 degrees in there. Remember it clearly. And as soon as I walk in, he was like New York in the best way possible, where there was like no small talk.
No, I've sold to Wall Street. I know these guys.
Exactly. And he just points at his monitor and he's like, there's an HDMI. You can plug your laptop in for your presentation. And I'm like, presentation? I thought we were having coffee. And then I looked to my right and people were wheeling chairs in. And the next thing you know, there's 9 of us crammed in this 90-degree Manhattan office. And that's how he started. Like he was just like, listen, we had your competitor in. You're here. How are you better? And again, I was by myself and I had just done all this research. And so I was feeling pretty confident that it would work. But on the other hand, I was like, if it doesn't work, I'm here by myself. There's no proof, right? So I just was like, hey, can I start with how they're better? Because they literally just released an add-on to their core solution that not only do we not have, but we hadn't even considered it. And here's what it is. And it was almost as though I was selling on behalf of the competitor. I was like, here it is. Their first like beta customer is in the apparel space. If this is going to be important, I'm going to save my team a lot of time on the RFP response and flying them all up here. But I'm going to save you a bunch of time too on evaluating us as an alternative. And they went into a debate around it where, 7 of the 8 of them were like, why would we go to a reviews provider for that? And there was one person going, well, what if we need it a couple of years from now? Like, well, I'm sure we'll be ready in 2 years if that's important and we see an important market for it. And the guy, the head of e-commerce, finally just came back to me and was just like, not important to us. Keep going. And I was like, all right, well, we give that up so we can be great at our core. This is what we're great at. And, instead of giving him a presentation, I showed him a couple of websites, and literally within 10 minutes, the guy is showing me his actual budget, which had never happened to me in 20 plus years of selling. That the 5th line item down was ratings and reviews technology and a dollar amount. He's like, can you hit that? And we had a dialogue around that. And 10 days later, they threw out the whole RFP process. They didn't have us fly up. They selected us and we went into the contract negotiation.
And in the book, you said typically it's a 6-month sales cycle. And you said you got this thing signed in 4 weeks.
Well, yeah, if you, there was a study that the Corporate Executive Board did a couple of years ago, which is now Gartner, that looked at in a consensus buying environment, where do buyers spend their time on an evaluation. And what they found was only 39% is attributed to talking to you, your competitors, or their internal buying groups, that 61% was doing homework outside of the claims review. And I just believe that the reason they do the homework is because they're not getting to that prediction point in their own brains that they feel comfortable that what they heard from you is true. And they're doing all this extra homework. That's 61%, not a foregone conclusion. When we lead with transparency and we help them with both the cons and the pros, we shrink the 61%. And that's where you see that sales cycle acceleration.
All right, we are off and running in my conversation with Todd Caponi. So normally I ask for all kinds of different stuff here on the show. Like I might ask for reviews. I might ask for you to share this podcast with a friend or 10. A lot of times I offer for you to go to salesquality.com and download a free copy of my book. I got a totally different ask this time. I suspect that there's a chance that we might not be connected on LinkedIn. And I am publishing content, publishing videos, sharing live events that we're hosting online nowadays, doing lots and lots of stuff on LinkedIn. And so even if you're not on the marketing list that we have, even if you're not, even if you haven't downloaded the book, chances are there's a bunch of stuff that I'm sharing that you might find valuable. And so if you're a startup CEO, a sales leader, a salesperson, or you just want to get access to some of the content that we're publishing each and every week, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a week, send me a connection request over at LinkedIn. I'm really easy to find. I'm the only Scott Sambucci on LinkedIn that I know of. So just type in my name, send a connection request, and just send me a quick note like, hey, listen to the podcast, you said, send you a connection request. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe have a quick chat there on LinkedIn to learn more about you and your business and how we might be able to help you out. So do it. Send me a LinkedIn connection request if we're not connected. And otherwise, if we are connected, then do one of those other things. Leave a review, tell a friend or 10, go over to salesquality.com and download a copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Lots of ways for us to help you out. And that's it. Simple ask. Let's head back to my conversation with Todd. This is a wonderful story, and it really, just like you were talking about earlier with giving your customers a story to understand, why, how you can help them with Tommy Boy, right? Yeah. So maybe take a step out now that we have like an image or an idea of like what it means to be transparent in that situation. Can you just go up a level or two and describe for somebody the whole premise of your approach, the whole premise of whether it's the book or the concept of a transparency sale? What does it mean to be transparent? And why is it so important now?
Yeah, I think the thing that I keep seeing is oftentimes we get confused between transparency and authenticity. I believe they're two different things, right? Authenticity is being yourself, being true to you and like not hide it, like not being somebody else, which I agree with. Transparency, though, is acting as though if you are in an internal meeting talking about what your company's products and solutions and technology does and doesn't, that you could feel comfortable having that same conversation with the customer. Our journey, our role in sales is to help the customer make an informed, confident decision that will work for them, right? We're the Sherpa to their buying journey. We're their personal trainer to help them not only achieve what they thought they wanted to achieve, but see the path to achieving more. And the only way to do that is to be truthful with them about what the solution does and doesn't. And that's something that we can all do. It's, the one story that you saw in the book that I point to that kind of helps people crystallize this is that every organization in the world gives up something to be great at their core. I always joke about our favorite retailer in the world, IKEA, right? Like when you go to an IKEA, they're the number one furniture retailer in the world for 10 straight years, and the experience sucks, right? Like, but they keep winning. You got to find.
I hate IKEA. The only reason I go to IKEA is so I can get ice cream when it's done or a cinnamon roll.
Meatballs are fantastic too. Like you got to go to the meatballs. But again, the number one furniture retailer in the world for 10 straight years because they basically sell you on, hey, listen, we're going to give up these elements of your experience, right? Like you're going to have to find it. You're going to have to write down the code or take a picture of it with your phone because you're going to have to pull the 2-ton boxes onto a cart that doesn't have brakes, jam it into your car Tetris style, drive home with an injury or two, open the box and F-bomb your way through an assembly that's got 150 parts and no words on the work instructions so that you can have modern Scandinavian design furniture that you didn't pay much for, right? And so if a customer comes to you and says, hey, listen, I need you to help me design my living room, and then, I like it to be feng shuied, and you're going to come assemble this stuff and put it in the room the right way, IKEA's going to go, fantastic, that's not us. Go to Room and Board, go to Macy's, go to Crate and Barrel. Here's what we do. And I think when we lead with that type of thing in any experience, any type of environment where we say, hey, listen, this is what we don't do. Here's what we do great. We give that up to be great at this. You build trust, you build credibility, you help the customer predict what their experience is going to be like. And then all the other goodness comes along with it, that you're working the deals that you should be working and stopping working the ones that you won't. And when you do it that way too, once the customer buys and implements, you've got a ton more rope in terms of when things inevitably do go wrong, right? Because you've been transparent and you've built that trust so that your churn goes down and your renewals go up. And again, when I wrote the book, I just felt so passionately about gosh, the benefits of transparency go far beyond the obvious, right? It's not just about being a good person and woo, right? It's all of those, the back end elements around sales cycles and win rates and working good deals and making it hard on your competitors and reducing churn that all come from just that little piece of let's help the customer predict their experience. You start there and the magic happens on the back end.
So what would you say to a company like, say, a startup? A lot of the people listening to our show are startups, like B2B enterprise. And you can share that story about IKEA and say well, this is the IKEA experience. Or Southwest is another one that popped in mind for me. It's what you're getting when you book a flight on Southwest. That's good for them. But listen, we're just trying to get to the first million in revenue, or we're trying to we just closed a Series A. We're trying to get from 1 to 10 as quickly as possible so we can get to a Series B.
Yes.
And you're telling me I got to stay focused on my core, but God, there's market opportunity over here, or that customer is a great customer and they need these features. How do you translate what you're talking about for big companies to somebody who's just starting up in that early growth stage?
It's even more important. My side hustle is I run an early stage tech incubator in Chicago called VentureSCALE that's focused solely on revenue and sales and building that foundation. And what I tell every founder is one organization, by the way, it's an organization in Chicago that I'm also on the advisory board for, where they got themselves in trouble. We defined a sweet spot, and it was going to be retailers between 100 million in revenue and $1 billion in revenue. And guess what happened 2 weeks later? After we agreed this whole thing, Nordstrom comes in as an inbound lead. So massive retailer. First call I get is from their CEO. Todd, great news. Nordstrom came in as a lead. And I'm like, I don't know if you want to do, remember what we talked about and the downside of doing that. And he's just F off, Todd, it's Nordstrom. I'm going for it because if we get them, it will it'll paint the picture for the rest of the organization. I'm like, okay, be careful. And then what ended up happening on the back end is they spent 6 months with Nordstrom going back and forth. Nordstrom wanted to reprioritize their whole roadmap. And then all of a sudden the holidays came around. Nordstrom goes into hiding. And then January comes around and they never heard from them again. So they spent 6 months in this kind of wheel of death, right? And it put them almost out of business. My point is the first thing that we need to share as a early stage technology, whatever startup, is that make sure that you're being transparent about where you are in your journey, right? There's so many of these entrepreneurs that almost want to hide it so that they can get the big customer. Can't do that anymore, right? The proliferation of all kinds of information makes that impossible. And the last thing you need is to spend 6 months focusing your whole organization on that big deal and then have them find out wait, you've only got 8 people and your office is in a garage?
Dude, are you hacking? Hold on a second. Are you hacking my coaching calls? Because we just yesterday in one of our group calls, we do a group call every Monday on pipeline and deal conversion. It's just it's almost like pipeline review. And one of the clients that we've got is working on a deal with the VA hospital system, huge, right? And he made a little progress and it kind of went dark. And we talked, okay, well, it's probably not a good time. They're not really set up to support it, but he was interested to kind of learn the process. And we got talking about like what to do now. And I said, look, I'll just call him back and say, look, we're just curious about the decision cycle and budget. It's the first time we've ever sold to an organization like this. And some of the other people on the call were like, well, if you tell them that you haven't sold to them before, they won't buy from you. And I said, but if you spend 6 months, I literally said you can spend 6 months getting all the way through it. And then procurement's going to send you this big checklist and ask for your financials and ask for your references and ask for this. And you're going to find out then that you're not going to buy from you.
Exactly.
So you're better off telling them now than later on, because they might actually be excited that you're not IBM.
100%. That's exactly it. It's, again, the advice for all of these entrepreneurs is pretend that the customer has a chair in your internal meeting right next to you, where like they need to be a part of this and understand what you do, what you don't do, and who you really are. Because if that customer is not cool with it, yeah, you're right. You don't want to wait 6 months. You want them to know right now so that you can go spend your time on the customers that are cool with it and want to partner with you. Like you said, there are companies out there that are very excited about working with early stage tech startups. And there's a lot of organizations that just don't have the stomach for it. You better know that in the first call versus the 16th call 6 months later.
Yeah, absolutely love that. Well, and one of the teams on the call, he's gotten so far, because one of the frustration points is in a lot of sales is like, we got this single point of contact. They replied to some email or they filled out a form. And now you got like one point of contact, but you know that there's 10 or 20 or 30 other people. And so a question that always comes up is like, well, is it okay if I kind of go around them or over them and try to get to other people? I'm like, yeah, you got to. You can't just wait for this one person. And again, there's this fear of like, well, I don't want to like annoy this person. And so we just basically said, well, what if you had rules of engagement? What if you just told all of your customers, this is how we sell our product, right? And so one of our clients actually built an entire document that he calls, and the top of it says, warning, we are a startup. It's almost like a manifesto. It's like, this is how we work. We're not your typical vendor. We don't have committees. We don't have rigid deal terms. We seek input from every member of the client to make sure that we're the right fit. And he's just like, it's like a 2-page document. Mm-hmm. And he's now using this. I'm like, this is magic, man. Because now you're owning the relationship from the beginning.
Yeah. And as long as you're explaining why you do it that way, like you're not doing it that way because you know best. It's, hey, listen, we've had experience working with customers. And what we find is that in the end, the experience is better for both of us if we do it this way. And that's it, right? And that's fully transparent. And you either buy into it or you don't in the first 10 minutes. And if you don't, that's cool. Like you get to go work on other companies that do buy into it.
Yeah, dude, I love this. So some other places where in the book you talk about transparency, and there's a section of the book on results. It's a page. I took a ton of notes on this. So page 34, you've got a really good graphic. Chapter 3, why doing it right matters. You call it the results formula. Mm-hmm. And when I was reading the book, I was, I guess, surprised in some way, and I mean this in a good way. Like, oh, that's interesting. Like when I thought about the transparency sale, I was thinking about buyer empathy and being open and honest about being truthful, right? This chapter, I think, is really critical to think about transparency in your own organization, because it's talking about like, what are the numbers that you need to hit in order to make the growth or get the growth that you want. So I'd love for you to just talk about how the transparency sale applies to the internal machine that gets built from a sales organization.
Well, yeah, I think, in that section of one of the things, as a former sales leader yourself too, it's like, gosh, I used to measure everything. Like I had a sales ops person at the beginning of each month, he'd burst into tears because he knew he was going to be measuring a lot. But really it comes down to just 4 things, right? That results are just made up of the number of opportunities you're working on, how big they are, how many you win, so what percentage you win, and how fast you win them. And the funny thing is, and this was advice that I used to give sales leaders too around positioning the fact that next year the targets just went up by 20%, is that if you really look at each one of those elements, it only takes small little wins to result in big result gains. So 5% lifts on each one of those 4 result in over 20% growth. And 5% is nothing when you think about the number of deals that you're working on. So 5% of 20 deals is one, like one more deal.
So instead of having 20 deals in my pipeline, I go find one more qualified opportunity. Somehow.
Exactly. And if you're doing it right, those things should happen on their own because you're working on better opportunities, and those customers are more likely on the back end to advocate on your behalf and buy more, right? So like it all feeds itself. It becomes this machine for growth. And so when I look at that results formula and think about like internally, it just becomes a means to really focus on here's the KPIs that matter, and transparency contributes to all of them. So when you think about the number of deals you're working on, again, if you sell correctly and you set proper expectations, your customers stay, buy more, and tell their friends. So hopefully you're going to be working on more deals than anyway. But then your deal sizes should go up when you incorporate all of these elements because there's, it's built on a foundation of trust. But then like there's a whole chapter on transparent negotiating that is really counterintuitive, but at its core, you end up with more valuable deals like overnight. Then your win rates go up because you're working on deals you should be working on, and you're not even qualifying the ones that aren't a fit based on transparency. And then again, when we think about what we talked about earlier around where 61% of the buyer's journey is spent doing all that extra homework, and when you do the homework for them, that 61% shrinks, your sales cycle shrinks, and again, your results go up. So again, I'm biased, of course, but when you think about those four elements, just injecting transparency into your kind of day-to-day and the way that you think about your conversations with your customers, your presentations, and even your negotiations, it should have dramatic results. And, for the most part, that happens to be what's going on, which I'm lucky. That's why I'm still doing that and not back being a CRO somewhere.
Yeah. And just to recap, the four are number of qualified opportunities. So imagine deals in your pipeline.
Yeah.
Average deal size. So what's the contract value of those deals? Win rate, conversion rate of those deals, and then those three divided by the average sales cycle. How long does it take?
Exactly.
And so when I saw this, it's funny because you mentioned them as KPIs. I get these questions all the time, whether it's a client or somebody on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, how do I grow sales faster? Like, how do I get more leads? Or like, how do I get to $1 million in revenue? And I'm like, well, you just got to get more qualified deals. Well, how to get more qualified deals? Well, you have to know what your target market is, and you have to do lead qualification. It's just like you keep breaking it down. And the reason I loved it in the book around transparency is like as a manager, if I'm managing the company, if I'm a CEO managing the company and I'm trying to figure out like how do we grow 20% month over month growth? Cool. Well, let's do 5% better in each of those four areas. And the math it comes actually to 22%. Mm-hmm. So if I'm even a high growth organization trying to do 20% month over month growth, just do 5% better with opportunities, 5% better with deal size, 5% better with win rate, 5% better with sales cycle.
Right.
That's
going to
get 20%.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if again, 5% is nothing. If your average sales cycle is 60 days, 5% is 3. Like get it down to 57, right? Like, I mean, it's just thinking about it in those easy terms. But, when I would do my board presentations, my last 2 leadership roles, this was one of the core slides I always had was quarter over quarter, year over year. How are we doing in these 4 categories? Because I always set it up that if we just grow 5%, do 5% better in each one of these 4, here's the results that we're looking to get at. And we use those as our KPIs that kind of kick off those conversations. So it becomes just this pervasive way to simplify your approach. Now, the other thing, though, as a manager that was kind of eye-opening to me is that, one of my directors that I had, he was looking across we had a corporate inside sales team, and we were looking at 2 reps. There was one rep that had tons of qualified opportunities in his pipeline, right? And he was celebrated for that. Like, wow, look at him. He has wow, how are you doing that? You're finding all these qualified opportunities. It's amazing. We had another guy, not so many qualified opportunities, but the second guy's results were better. His, ARR turned out to be better. And you know why? Because his win rates were considerably higher, his deal sizes were considerably higher, and his cycle lengths were considerably shorter. And so we've got to get out of the business of looking at one and going, hey, lots of deals in your pipeline. Lots of deals in your pipeline is not necessarily a good thing, right? That we need to look at each one of those as a ratio of one another, because that dude that had the better results, but with much less opportunities, was great at qualifying in and out and was able to articulate what we did in a way that mattered to the customer, help them predict their experience. And he was really spending his time incredibly efficiently. And I would take him over the guy with a ton of opportunities, most of which we were going to lose any day of the week.
Yeah, not to mention the amount of time it's going to take to manage through all of those deals.
Exactly.
And in that situation, I always like to take an extreme case. Like, let's say for every 100 leads, you get one deal that's $10,000 a year. Well, somebody would say, well, I got to grow from $10,000 to $20,000 in revenue. So I guess I have to go get 200 leads now. Like, or gosh, like, what if we just nudge the conversion rate from 1% to 2%? You're like, holy crap, I never thought about that.
Exactly.
People are like, how do I get more leads? They're like, well, why do you need more leads? Because I need more sales. Okay.
Yes. I used to teach that. Like back when I owned my first sales training company, I literally taught that. And now I look back at it and go, what was I thinking? Because that's exactly it, right? The problem with data. And it was something that, it was an article I saw that was said that to get to a decision maker when you're prospecting, it takes an average of some ungodly amount of touches, right? It's like, I saw one study that said 8 touches, one said 15, one said 17.
Oh, yeah.
And right, it's all those things. And then the advice is, you're not touching the customer enough, right? Like if it takes 8, why are you giving up at 5? Well, I look at that and go, why is it taking 8? Why is it taking 18? Why is your reach out to that customer so off-putting that it takes 18 for them finally to go, I give, right? Like, how do we look at actually the techniques that we're using so that we, as individuals, instead of having to get to 8 because that's what the data tells us, how do we do it so that it only takes us 2 or 3 because we're actually communicating with a potential buyer in a way that they want to engage? So, like, we got to stop looking at data for data's sake and go, well, if that's the average, I'm not touching them enough. And instead go, how do I make every touch more effective so that data skews lower for me?
Yeah, and there's the whole chapter. You've got a whole chapter in the book, chapter 5, email prospecting, right? And yeah, you talk a lot about adding value. And this is the way we got in touch was through our mutual friend Jason Bay. Mm-hmm. So Jason Bay runs, he's got Blissful Prospecting as his business, and he teaches outbound and prospecting, and he does coaching in our program. And this is one of the things he's always telling our clients, like, you're setting up these sequences. It's not about like, how do I map out 25 touches today and then run that sequence over 45 days? Like, why don't we just work on the first email? Let's get the first one right, and let's just see if people are replying to it. Because, like, what do the other 24 matter if it's just going to piss them off?
Exactly. Well, that was the thing with, as a CRO, the one thing that I try to really reinforce with everybody when you think about empathy for the target is, as I moved up in my career, my volume of email that I would receive every day went up, right? Like by the time I was at that level, I was getting 100 to 150 emails a day, and I was in 30 to 35 meetings per week. But did I check all my emails? Yeah, because I had to, because there could be a winner in there. There could be something that matters to my customers, my prospects, or my team. And those were my top priorities, right? Like, I could literally prioritize what I'm looking for in my inbox. And the 2 pieces of advice I always give is, number 1, you've got to optimize not only for the subject line, but for the first 10 words of your email. Like, I keep seeing articles that are like, how do you optimize the subject line for opens? Well, in every UI that I have for email, there's a preview of the first 10 words or so. Are we optimizing those? And number 2 is, how do we give and be personalized and valuable and show it in those first 10 words that's going to make me want to open it? And the way you do that is to make it attributable to my team, my customers, my prospects, right? And give. And the example I always give is, we had posted sales development rep roles on our website. And again, we were in Chicago. And 2 days later, I get an email from a company that just says, Todd, here is a SDR salary study for how much SDRs are making in the Chicago market. I open it up, and that's exactly what it was. And I was like, wow, that's really helpful. And we're hiring SDRs. It'd be great to make sure that we're paying them at the correct market and all that. 2 weeks later, quarter ends, they send me another one that says, Todd, here is a CRO board deck template to help you prepare for your board meeting. I open it up, and the next line is, hey, you just finished your quarter. Hopefully this saves you some time. And I'm like, I love you. Like, wow, you are all, who are you? And like, those 2 things had nothing to do with what they did. But I felt subconsciously like, I want to know who these people are, because they're adding value and making my life better. and they're standing out in that sea of 100 emails that all start with the words, I wanted to, right? Like that's all white noise. And instead it's like SDR salary study, board deck template for CRO, like all things you care about. Like, this is awesome. And I ended up engaging with them. And so that's just the way to think about it. You got to think about that white noise and the fact that I'm scrolling through in between meetings or on my train ride home back when I went to an office, and that I had to prioritize the emails that I open and engage with. And if it's about you, it's low priority, right? If your words start with I wanted to, it's probably getting select all delete. Even if your message, like I never got to it, says I wanted to give you $1 million, right? Like I never read it because it starts about you and what you wanted to. And I love you, but there's just not enough time in the day to prioritize what you need. It's what I need. Customers, my prospects, and my team to be happy and successful.
Do you remember that the company that sent you those two, the salary and the deck? Do you remember what they did?
They were in the recruiting space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you end up working with them at some point?
No, I didn't, but I did engage. The thing about it is, the other piece is like, people always ask me like, hey, as a senior level sales leader, did you ever answer a cold call? Even though right outside the window, I got a whole team of reps that are making cold calls, and I'm sitting in there going, I never once answered a cold call. Mm-hmm. And like, well, that's crazy. Why do you encourage people to do it then? Well, with that much going on, I couldn't define my day by interruptions. It just can't happen, right? However, every call, every touch point is an opportunity to either build or erode trust, right? Mm-hmm. And the calls is an opportunity to either build or erode trust, which is why if you just call and hang up, then you're not doing anything. If you call and leave a voicemail that's personalized and valuable, just like your emails, you're building trust, right? And in that sea of emails, you know how many voicemails I get a day? 1, 2, like all these cold callers, we're never leaving voicemails. It's an opportunity to stand out, but don't make it, I wanted to. Like, hey, I wanted to see if you had 15 minutes of it. Like, I'm sorry, I don't. But if you're like, hey, Todd, I saw this study that I thought might be helpful in your pursuit of the goals that you're looking for, I'll point you to it. I'll send you an email along with it. Like those kind of things. I read all of them because my voicemails would convert to text and send me an email. And it's an opportunity to stand out. So keep touching all of those different channels, but don't expect somebody at the C-level to just be answering random calls during the day. But it is an opportunity to build a relationship, and you can do it through your voicemails.
Yeah, and that recruiting firm, was there any particular reason why you did not engage with them? Was it just wrong timing, not a good fit, something else?
Yeah, it was. I think at the time we were just not engaged, or I think at the time we had just a specific couple of approved recruiters that we were using on spot type stuff, but we had an internal recruiting team. So our CEO and our head of HR were just like, we don't need more recruiters right now. But I was like, these people are like, this was really interesting, the approach that they took. And they built a relationship, and I feel like I owe it to them to at least pitch them. And I think I did. We just didn't end up going forward with them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the lesson there, because a lot of people are like, well, if you didn't buy, then what was the point? Well, the point is, when you're sending out those prospecting emails, you're not trying to sell. You're just trying to get what you got. You said engage. Like, I engage with them.
Yes.
And that job of the prospecting is just to figure out, are you a fit or not? Going back to the whole point in the first place. And you just weren't a fit. But at least now they knew.
Yeah, exactly. It was quick.
Like blast the next 23 emails to you for no reason.
Yeah, they made a deposit, and then when it was ready for them to make a withdrawal, I took advantage of that, right? And like, I think that's. There's other speakers that say this analogy a lot. Like you wouldn't go to the bank and make a withdrawal unless you've made a few deposits. And this is all about making deposits, number one. But number two, kind of a side note, one of the things that I'm doing in my own business is like, gosh, I'm like purported expert, right? Like that's what I do. But I got clients that go silent on me, that choose the status quo, that sometimes don't respond to anything. And so what do? Well, I don't send them an email going, hey, I wanted to see if you had a few minutes to update me. I'm like,
right.
No. Instead, if I wrote an article, I might just share the article. Just go, hey, here's an article about Tommy Boy and, how where he was headed was actually in a good direction. Thought this could be funny and inspire your presentation choreographies. Like it's a client that maybe has gone silent on me for a couple of months. Those get me more responses of, oh, hey, Todd, this was hilarious. Love it. Super helpful. And I know we owe you a call. Here's what's going on.
Yeah.
So instead of like making it about yourself, give, and you'll find that those clients will reciprocate with exactly the message because they know why you're reaching out. Don't even tell them. Just be a giver. Always be a giver in a personalized and valuable way. And you're going to just see relationships blossom, and you're going to get to your no's faster too, which is just as important as your yeses.
And how does that relate to the concept of the transparency sale when we're talking like taking this kind of value-based approach? Just to make a link for people.
Yeah, when I think about prospecting, I think of prospecting in a separate category from the core concept of transparency. I think my header line is how unexpected honesty and understanding the buying brain can transform your results. And this prospecting is understanding the buying brain, right? It's the true empathy. I don't encourage people to prospect and go, hey, this is why we suck. Like, no, that doesn't help anybody. You know, you're trying to build a relationship with empathy and giving and, you know, those types of things so you can actually have the opportunity to help a customer predict and help a customer be better at what they do. And so transparency plays a role in, you know, aiding the buying brain and making great decisions that they feel confident in and they'll want to buy more, stay, and tell their friends.
Yeah, and in context of that principle, what that recruiting agency did with the salaries and with the deck, it's something Mary Lou Tyler, who's been on our podcast before, has talked about, which is entering the prospect's brain in the place where they're at, right? So they understood you as a buyer profile. They understood you're a CRO at this kind of company, and they knew you're probably hiring SDRs, or they found that job posting somewhere. They knew it's end of quarter and that you have a board meeting. It was about you, and that because they took the time to understand the buyer and what would be valuable.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that worked for 20 other CROs too, right? I'm an advocate when you think about startups too. And what I teach our cohort companies so often is this concept of extreme firmographic focus, meaning...
You have to explain that one.
Yeah, and especially in times of uncertainty. Instead of trying to sell to everybody and just hope that companies come in, it's how do we firmly define the firmographics that we want to focus on? It's not defining everybody that could be a good customer. It's, hey, for the next month, let's focus on these types of companies, like these verticals, in these sizes, in these geos, and then these types of individuals, the demographics within those firmographics. And just for a month, let's just focus on that. What ends up happening is you end up just by osmosis figuring out what they need and what would be personalized and valuable to each one of those organizations. As you start to engage, because you're so focused on those, your confidence and credibility in those conversations oozes through the phone to the person on the other end. And that, hey, confidence, like this is a side note, but from a behavioral science perspective, confidence smells and it's contagious. Like when you're confident, it lights up a part of your brain. And when you sense it that somebody else is confident, it lights up that same area of your brain, making you more confident. And that's what extreme firmographic focus does, right? It builds the credibility. You start to understand, and you can actually start to read the minds of your potential buyers. And in the end, you'll start to have much higher engagement and then take that focus and start to slide it out slowly. It's what we did in 2008. It was the first time I'd gotten thrust into a VP of sales role. And I convinced our CEO to throw out our account list and just focus on one vertical of one company size for a short period of time. And let's just double down there. And maybe it was luck, but it was freaking magic. Like we signed like 5 companies in that industry, and it was in discrete manufacturing, specifically aerospace. But then we went out to like aerospace and defense. And then we went to oil services. And then we went to automotive, which wasn't good in 2008, 2009. But we were looking at these kind of discrete manufacturing. And each one of our reps was like an expert on all of those things and could absolutely read the minds of the potential buyers.
Yeah.
And it turned into magic the way that worked.
Yeah, I remember in 2008, I was selling real estate data to Wall Street after the housing crash. And we only had one kind of data set. It was active market, active listing data. Every house that's on the market, we knew it. We're the only place that had it. And it was the only thing I could talk about. And so it was like you said, it was like magic, because I would end up, 10, 20 calls a day talk to 3, 4 traders on Wall Street. I'm like, oh, I just talked to this guy at Morgan Stanley. This is what he's saying. What do you think about that? And then the next guy would say, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it this way. And all of a sudden, I became like the real-time data analytics guy because I had no other choice. Like I only had one data set to sell. But you're right. It gave me a lot of confidence. I ended up doing speaking, ended up doing panels and everything else that went along with it. But if you're trying to, like you're using your situation, you try to sell to automotive and oil and gas and aerospace and defense all at once, there's no way that you can have a clear message. And you can't really understand the buyer when you're trying to do that outreach in the first place.
Exactly. I mean, we closed one big aerospace deal, and then every rep went and jumped on every other aerospace company. And the next thing you know, we got like 4 of the big 5 that we wanted. And we're just like, awesome. All right, we've kind of exhausted that. Let's just go a little wider. Let's go to the defense companies, Northrop Grumman, and some of those. And like, all right, we get that. There's a lot of overlap with oil and gas. So we're finally ready. Let's go to Halliburton and Schlumberger and all those guys. And we just kind of slowly moved out, and it's magic the way that works. And I think it's really important for early stage startups to think about where do we want to gain our focus and build that credibility and be the expert, so that when we call and have these conversations, we're really truly providing value instead of being there to sell the customer something. And that's what ends up resulting from it.
Man, I sent you a message last night. I told you we could do like an 8-hour podcast.
Oh, totally.
I feel like
we probably need to do a second one.
The surface here. Yeah, look at you, future pacing. I love it. I'm usually the one that brings it up, and I'm glad you did. So in the meantime, absolutely for people listening, like we've just skimmed the surface of the book, The Transparency Sale. Like I even said when I first bought a copy in preparation for this a few weeks back, I was like, everything about it is awesome. Like even the cover is well designed. The way that you present the material, I think, is really clear for people. I got a ton of value out of it, so I definitely recommend people pick up a copy. Aside from getting a copy of the book, what would you recommend if people want to learn more about the work you're doing? Whether it's speaking or workshops or consulting, or you mentioned the VentureSCALE in Chicago.
Yeah.
So, what's the best way for people to get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard not to find me, which is good. I think I've done that right. But my website is called transparencysale.com, where I've got just tons of, I've got blog posts, I've got short videos. There's a bunch of just free materials there that'll help. But if you feel like it, I obviously describe my programs and everything. VentureSCALE is kind of my side hustle, but we just took it national. We have our applications just opened up for our next cohort, which will kick off in October. But I mean, venturescale.io is a good place to look there.
Okay.
A cool little program to help early stage tech companies build that foundation for scalable revenue growth. And I'm on LinkedIn all over it. So feel free to follow or connect with me there and let me know where you heard me. I love that. And I would love to answer any questions for anybody.
Yeah, for sure. And if and when we do a part 2, one topic we didn't get into very deeply was a lot of the psychological side of human behavior, which you spent some time in the beginning of the book describing the backdrop of this. And I've done a lot of reading in that area, starting all the way back with Brian Tracy. I don't know if you remember these old audio cassettes, The Psychology of Selling.
Yeah,
I used to listen to these audio cassettes.
I just referenced his book Goals. Like it's a classic.
Oh yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Maximum Achievement is another good book of his.
Yeah. The guy's he's a master. But yeah, in times of uncertainty like we're in right now, that behavioral science has become about 5 times more important too. So stuff that I wrote about, I've kind of double clicked on it in areas because right now we have a survival mechanism that we go into when we're in times of uncertainty and we're all feeling it. And there's ways to really hone in on that can impact your sales pursuits in a positive way.
Yeah. So let's make that a plan for part 2. Let's dive into the buyer psychology. That'll help you form out some of the, I know for me, one of the best ways to work on some ideas is just to talk through them. So
yeah,
feels like
love that.
And then coming on
last
too.
But not least that we didn't talk about at all is my new nerdery, which is sales history. So
I wanted to ask you, I have in my notes, because you said on LinkedIn, you're a sales historian.
Yeah, I have a book. I got a book from 1947 called The 5 Great Rules of Selling by Percy H. Whiting. And he referenced other books. And I kept following them back. And I've been reading sales books from the 1890s through about 1925. So I'm like on weekends, I just read a book from 1919 on the psychology of selling. it is fascinating. A lot of the stuff that we read about today is absolutely still true, but it was the stuff that was written back then. Like, I scroll through my LinkedIn profile and I'm like, that one was talked about in 1923. That one was like literally 95% of it. But there is some stuff that is crazy that they used to do back then that I just find fascinating, like phrenology, which is studying the structure of somebody's forehead to determine how you should message to them. There's the way that snake oil sales worked, and these medicine shows are amazing. There's these drummers, like there's so many stories. And then like the one I just wrote about a couple of weeks ago on Medium was how Mark Twain was actually not only the father of American literature, but likely the pioneer of sales enablement for a program that he did in selling Ulysses S. Grant's memoirs to he had 10,000 salespeople that he enabled via a 37-page sales handbook. And it resulted in his widow, Ulysses S. Grant's widow, getting what is the equivalent of $11 million in royalties because of what Mark Twain did. So unbelievable stories that I could nerd out on all day too.
Oh, I was a history major as an undergrad, so mostly U.S. history too. So now you got me.
Think about it for sales. There's a great story. There's so many awesome stories back then.
Dude, Todd, thank you. Really appreciate you hopping on the show. We'll definitely do a part 2. I'll have Jocelyn get in touch to make sure we get that scheduled. Get a copy. We'll get a copy of the links, everything that you shared. All the links will go up on our page. We'll make sure to share that when the show goes live so you can share it with your tribe. Until we talk again, dude, have an awesome day. Thanks for sharing your genius.
Yeah, thank you, man. That was a blast.
All right, man. Talk soon.
All right, we'll see ya.
Yeah.